Welcome back, you beautiful anomaly. You walking contradiction. You impossible equation they keep trying to solve with the wrong formula. They whisper your name in rooms you've never entered. They argue about who you really are because no single story explains your existence. Some call you gifted. Others call you dangerous. A few secretly hope you're just lucky. But deep down, they know something doesn't add up. One person shouldn't be able to survive that much, build that much, change that much. That's why they've convinced themselves there must be multiple versions of you. Tonight, you'll discover the unsettling truth they've been too afraid to accept. The room always goes silent before a lie is born. Not because people have discovered the truth, but because the truth standing in front of them is too expensive to accept. So they bargain with reality. They twist it. They decorate it. They invent shadows that don't exist. Anything feels safer than admitting one terrifying possibility, that an ordinary human being can become extraordinary through choices they refuse to make. That's the moment your existence becomes their favorite conspiracy. They don't actually fear you. They fear what your life quietly accuses them of. Every time you rise after a failure they would have surrendered to. Every time you remain calm while chaos begs for your attention. Every time you refuse to become bitter after betrayal, you force people into an uncomfortable courtroom inside their own minds. There are no judges there, no witnesses, just one painful question echoing through their conscience. If they can do it, why can't I? Most people never answer that question honestly. They erase it by creating another version of reality where you aren't normal anymore. Suddenly, you didn't earn your discipline. You were simply born different. You didn't build emotional control. You're just cold. You didn't sacrifice years of comfort to master your craft. You got lucky. Every invisible battle you survived gets erased by a story that protects their pride. Because accepting your effort would expose their excuses, the human mind has always preferred comfortable fiction over uncomfortable truth. It explains away what threatens its identity. When someone transforms beyond the limits of everyone around them, people don't immediately celebrate. First, they search for hidden advantages, secret connections, mysterious opportunities. Impossible circumstances. Anything except the simple explanation that consistency defeated talent, patience defeated speed, and responsibility defeated excuses. That's why your growth confuses them. They watched the same storms hit everyone. They saw the same failures, the same disappointments. Yet somehow you kept moving, not perfectly, not without pain, but forward. They expected those experiences to destroy you because those experiences would have destroyed the version of themselves they secretly know. Instead, those moments became your training ground. The strange part is that you rarely notice your own evolution while it's happening. Growth is quiet. It hides inside mornings when you wanted to quit but didn't. It hides inside nights when nobody applauded your effort. It hides inside every decision that felt insignificant until thousands of those decisions stacked into a completely different person. Other people only see the finished result. That's why they think it happened overnight. They never witnessed the invisible repetitions that rewrote your identity. They only met the person who emerged from them. And because they skipped the process, the outcome feels impossible. When reality feels impossible, imagination takes over. Stories begin spreading. Maybe you have connections. Maybe someone secretly helped you. Maybe you're pretending. Maybe there are multiple people behind everything you do. Notice how rarely anyone says the obvious sentence. Maybe they simply refuse to stop. Because that sentence carries responsibility. It removes every excuse. It reminds everyone listening that greatness doesn't belong to another species. It belongs to ordinary people willing to survive extraordinary levels of discomfort without demanding immediate rewards. Most people never realize that every excuse they invent about someone else's success quietly becomes a prison around their own future. The moment they say they're different, they've also declared, I could never become that. It's a comforting belief because it removes pressure. But comfort has always charged the highest price. Meanwhile, you continue becoming someone they cannot categorize, not because you're pretending. Because life demanded different weapons for different battles, you learned compassion without becoming weak. You learned confidence without becoming arrogant. You learned silence without becoming invisible. You learned forgiveness without becoming available for abuse. To people who never evolved, those qualities seem contradictory. To someone who has survived enough, they're simply necessary. That's the misunderstanding they can never solve. They assume strength has only one face. They believe kindness must always be soft. They think intelligence should always sound loud. But real transformation breaks every stereotype. It creates someone who can smile without surrendering, someone who can remain calm without feeling powerless, someone who can walk away without losing. And that kind of person doesn't fit inside the mental boxes people have spent their entire lives protecting. So they invent impossible explanations, because impossible explanations hurt less than possible discipline. Because myths protect fragile egos better than truth ever could. And every story they create about you reveals far more about the limits they've accepted for themselves than the limits you've shattered. The most dangerous illusion is the one people create after looking into your eyes. They think they've figured you out. They see one expression, one conversation, one moment, and suddenly they believe they've unlocked your entire identity. They walk away carrying a version of you that exists only inside their imagination. Then someone else meets you under completely different circumstances and describes an entirely different person. Before long, they aren't discussing who you are anymore. They're arguing over which version of you is real. They never consider the terrifying possibility that every version they've seen belongs to the same mind. People are addicted to simplicity. They want labels because labels make the world predictable. If you're kind, then you should always be kind. If you're quiet, then you should always remain silent. If you're confident, then you should never hesitate. Their minds crave consistency because consistency feels safe. But life never rewards people who stay trapped inside one personality. Survival demands adaptation. Growth demands flexibility. Wisdom demands knowing when to change your approach without changing your values. You became different because every chapter of your life demanded a different weapon. Pain taught you silence. Betrayal taught you caution. Failure taught you discipline. Success taught you humility. Loneliness taught you independence. None of those lessons erased the person you were. They simply added new layers that most people never had the courage to build. That's why one person remembers your compassion while another remembers your boundaries. One calls you patient while another swears you're ruthless. One says you're gentle. Another insists you're impossible to manipulate. They're all telling the truth. They're simply describing the version of you their own behavior awakened. Think about that for a moment. Not everyone meets the same version of you. Respect unlocks one door. Disrespect unlocks another. Loyalty is greeted differently than betrayal. Honesty receives a different response than deception. People often believe your personality changes randomly, but in reality, your standards decide which side of you they experience. Your character remains steady. Their actions determine which part becomes visible. The strongest people understand this secret. They don't carry one face into every room. They carry one identity with many expressions. Around children, they become patient. Around opportunity, they become focused. Around danger, they become fearless. Around manipulation, they become unreadable. Around genuine love, they become vulnerable without becoming weak. This isn't hypocrisy. It's emotional intelligence sharpened by experience. The world often mistakes adaptability for inconsistencies because it cannot separate personality from principles. Your principles remain fixed. Integrity, discipline, self-respect, loyalty. Those never change. Your behavior changes because different situations require different responses. Fire cannot be negotiated with the same way you comfort someone in pain. A predator cannot be handled the same way you embrace a friend. Nature itself survives through adaptation. Yet people expect human beings to remain emotionally frozen forever. Those expectations become prisons. They want the version of you they benefited from yesterday, not the version that protects itself today. They miss the person who tolerated disrespect because it made their lives easier. They complain that you've changed when In reality, you've simply stopped accepting what once wounded you. They confuse boundaries with arrogance, confidence with ego, silence with hatred, distance with cruelty. The truth is far less dramatic. You simply evolved. Growth always feels like betrayal to people who relied on your old weaknesses. That's why some become uncomfortable around you. They prepared arguments that used to control you. They rehearsed manipulations that once worked. They expected the same emotional reactions. Instead, they encountered someone calm enough to smile without surrendering, someone wise enough to walk away without explaining, someone disciplined enough to choose peace over proving a point. Their strategy failed because the person they expected no longer exists, so they begin searching for explanations. You're acting different. You've changed. You're not the same anymore. They're right. You're not. Because the old version paid tuition through pain, so the current version wouldn't have to repeat the same lessons. Every scar became education. Every disappointment became awareness. Every lonely season became preparation. What they call different is simply the visible evidence of invisible battles they never witnessed. The irony is that the people closest to you often struggle the most with your transformation. They built expectations around who you used to be. They memorized your habits, your fears, your predictable reactions. When those disappear, they don't know how to relate to you anymore. It feels as though they've lost someone, when in truth they're meeting someone who finally refused to abandon themselves. So let them debate which version of you is authentic. Let them argue over whether you're soft or dangerous, quiet or powerful, forgiving or impossible to break. They'll never understand that every face they've encountered belongs to one unshakable identity, an identity forged by experience, guided by principle, and revealed differently depending on the soul standing in front of it. The loudest transformations are almost always fake. Real evolution happens in silence, where no applause exists, where no cameras record your struggle, where nobody notices another piece of your old identity quietly dying. By the time the world finally looks in your direction, they don't witness your becoming. They only witness the impossible result. That's why they swear you appeared out of nowhere. They never saw the darkness that rebuilt you one lonely night at a time. While everyone else was obsessed with being seen, you became obsessed with becoming. They chased attention. You chased mastery. They counted followers. You counted failures that taught you something. They searched for shortcuts. You accepted the unbearable truth that every meaningful transformation demands payment and discomfort. That difference looked invisible at first. Years later, it became impossible to ignore. Most people believe growth begins with motivation. It doesn't. Motivation is fragile. It disappears the moment life becomes unfair. Real growth begins the day you stop negotiating with your excuses. The day you realize nobody is coming to rescue your future. Nobody will hand you discipline. Nobody will magically erase your fears. Every version of yourself worth becoming must be built through choices nobody will ever congratulate while you're making them. Those choices looked insignificant, waking up when comfort begged you to stay asleep, remaining focused when distraction promised easier rewards, practicing one more hour after everyone else stopped, reading one more page, learning one more lesson, walking away from one more toxic situation. Protecting your peace instead of protecting everyone's opinion of you. None of those moments looked extraordinary, but transformation has never been created by extraordinary moments. It has always been created by ordinary decisions, repeated until they become an extraordinary identity. The world never notices repetition, it only notices results. That's why people become shocked when your confidence suddenly appears effortless. They mistake calmness for natural talent. They mistake wisdom for luck. They mistake emotional control for personality. They have no idea those qualities were purchased with thousands of private battles they were never invited to witness. Every rejection sharpened your perspective. Every disappointment strengthened your patience. Every betrayal forced you to understand human nature more deeply. While others complained about pain, you studied it. You asked different questions. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you asked, What is this trying to teach me? That single shift separated your future from theirs because victims collect sympathy, students collect lessons. One eventually becomes exhausted, the other becomes unstoppable. There were seasons when nobody believed in your direction because there was nothing impressive to see. Your progress existed beneath the surface, like roots growing underneath the earth. Trees never become strong because people admire their branches. They become strong because their roots continue expanding where nobody looks. You became like that. Invisible effort, invisible discipline, invisible sacrifices. Invisible healing, the strongest foundations are always hidden. That's why weak observers underestimate them. Then one day the visible results finally emerge. Your confidence feels different. Your words carry weight. Your presence changes the atmosphere. Your decisions become sharper. Your emotions no longer control your actions. And suddenly everyone acts surprised. They call it overnight success. They call it natural ability. They call it destiny. Anything except what it truly is. Years of invisible preparation finally becoming impossible to hide. The irony is that many of the people questioning your transformation had front row seats to your struggle. They simply weren't paying attention. They saw you every day, but they never looked closely enough to notice the small improvements. Growth rarely announces itself. It whispers. One better decision today. One healthier habit tomorrow. One stronger boundary next week. One deeper understanding the week after that. Each improvement seems too small to matter until they combine into someone almost unrecognizable. People expect dramatic changes. Life creates gradual ones. That's why they miss them. Your evolution wasn't explosive. It was relentless, like water carving through stone, impossible to notice in a single moment, but undeniable after enough time has passed. Eventually, they begin asking impossible questions. When did you become this confident? When did you get so disciplined? How are you handling pressure like this? They ask because they're searching for one defining moment. There wasn't one. There were thousands. Thousands of mornings when nobody believed. Thousands of evenings when nobody applauded. Thousands of decisions that felt ordinary until they completely rewrote your identity. The greatest misunderstanding is that people think success begins the day everyone notices you. In reality, success begins the day you continue improving even when nobody does, because recognition has never created greatness. Greatness creates recognition. By the time the crowd finally realizes you've changed, the transformation is already finished. What they're seeing isn't a miracle unfolding before their eyes. It's the delayed arrival of years of invisible work, finally stepping into the light, leaving everyone convinced they've just met a completely different person. When in truth they simply failed to notice the quiet revolution that had been happening right in front of them all along. The most convincing lie the world ever created is that greatness looks like magic. People stare at the finished masterpiece and call it talent because talent is easier to admire than discipline. They'd rather believe you were born different than admit you became different through thousands of decisions they were unwilling to make. Every extraordinary result threatens the comfortable illusion that success belongs only to the chosen few. So instead of studying your habits, they worship your outcome. It protects them from confronting their own neglected potential. The strange thing about consistency is that it never feels powerful while you're living it. It feels repetitive, boring, invisible. Nobody applauds the person who wakes up early for the 100th time. Nobody celebrates another quiet evening spent learning while everyone else is chasing distractions. Nobody notices the decision to stay disciplined when temptation is screaming louder than purpose. Those moments disappear into ordinary life. Yet those ordinary moments quietly become the architecture of an extraordinary future. People love dramatic stories because dramatic stories are entertaining. They imagine success begins with one brilliant idea, one lucky opportunity, one miraculous breakthrough. Reality is much less exciting. Real transformation is painfully repetitive. It asks the same question every single day. Will you do it again? Will you choose discipline again? Will you remain focused again? Will you keep your promise to yourself again? The answer rarely changes your life in one day. It changes your identity over thousands of days. That is the secret almost nobody wants to hear, because repetition is not glamorous. It is exhausting. It demands effort long before it produces evidence. Most people quit during the silent season, where nothing seems to be happening. They mistake invisible progress for failure because the world has conditioned them to expect immediate rewards. If the results don't arrive quickly, they assume the process isn't working. But the strongest foundations are always built where impatient eyes cannot see. Imagine watching a sculptor strike a block of stone. One hit, nothing. 10 hits, nothing. 50 hits, still nothing. Then the 100th strike cracks the entire surface. The crowd applauds the final blow. They never understand that the first 99 created the possibility for the 100th. Life works the same way. Every discipline choice leaves a mark too small to notice. Every repeated action weakens the old version of you. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens the new one. Eventually, one ordinary day becomes the moment everyone calls extraordinary. Not because that day was different, because thousands before it prepared the outcome. That's why people misread your achievements. They don't see the invisible chain connecting today's success to yesterday's sacrifices. They only see the visible reward standing at the finish line. They ignore the lonely mornings, the rejected opportunities that didn't align with your purpose, the invitations you declined, the comforts you delayed, the entertainment you replaced with education, the habits you repeated until they became automatic. Those sacrifices never looked impressive individually. Together, they became unstoppable. Consistency has a strange relationship with time. At first, time seems to work against you. You invest effort, nothing changes. You stay disciplined, still nothing changes. Weeks pass, months pass. The mirror barely reflects your progress. The bank account barely moves. The skill still feels imperfect. That's when most people surrender. Not because they're incapable, because they're impatient. They confuse delayed results with absent results. But time eventually changes sides. One day, every habit you've repeated begins working for you instead of against you. Momentum appears, confidence grows naturally, opportunities multiply, skills become effortless. People call it talent, you call it Tuesday, because what amazes them has become normal to you. The irony is that consistency eventually becomes invisible even to the person practicing it. You stop noticing how disciplined you've become because discipline no longer feels difficult. What once required constant effort now feels like your natural identity. That's why genuinely successful people often underestimate themselves. They're no longer impressed by what they've trained themselves to do every day. Meanwhile, observers stand outside wondering how one person can accomplish so much. They search for hidden advantages, accurate formulas, special genetics, perfect timing, anything except the truth. The truth demands too much responsibility. If your success came from daily decisions, then their future also depends on daily decisions. That realization removes every comfortable excuse they've spent years protecting, so they replace discipline with talent, routine with genius, consistency with luck, because myths feel lighter than accountability. Never forget this. The greatest difference between ordinary and extraordinary people is rarely intelligence, rarely resources. Rarely opportunity, more often than not, it is the willingness to continue after the excitement disappears, when motivation fades, when recognition never comes, when nobody believes, when progress cannot yet be measured. That is where identities are forged, not in moments of inspiration, but in moments of repetition. Every quiet choice you make today becomes another invisible vote for the person you're becoming tomorrow. Eventually, those votes become so overwhelming that the world can no longer deny the evidence standing before them. They won't understand how you arrived there because they were searching for miracles while you were simply mastering the ordinary, one relentless decision at a time. The moment you stop explaining yourself, something unsettling happens. The noise around you gets louder, but your mind becomes quieter. People panic when they can no longer predict you. They become uncomfortable when your silence gives them nothing to dissect, nothing to manipulate. nothing to use against you. An unanswered question is more terrifying than a painful truth, and nothing creates more unanswered questions than a person who has learned that not every accusation deserves a defense. Most people spend their lives standing in invisible courtrooms. Every opinion becomes a verdict. Every rumor becomes an emergency. Every misunderstanding becomes a battle they feel obligated to win. They exhaust themselves trying to convince strangers that they are good, honest, worthy, intelligent. But there is one cruel reality they refuse to accept. Anyone determined to misunderstand you will always find new reasons to do it. You can explain your intentions, they'll question your motives. You can reveal the facts, they'll invent new doubts. You can prove your loyalty, they'll call it manipulation. You can remain humble, they'll mistake it for weakness. You can become confident, they'll accuse you of arrogance. Some minds don't search for truth, they search for confirmation of the story they've already decided to believe. Once you understand that, you stop wasting energy trying to rewrite someone else's imagination. The strongest people aren't fearless because they've defeated every enemy around them. They're peaceful because they've defeated the desperate need to be understood by everyone. That victory changes everything. Silence becomes your shield instead of your punishment. Distance becomes your strategy instead of your escape. Self-respect becomes louder than self-defense. There is enormous power in refusing to participate in conversations designed only to drain your spirit. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every argument deserves your intelligence. Not every insult deserves your attention. Every unnecessary explanation is a withdrawal from the emotional bank account you're supposed to be investing in your future. Watch how insecure people behave. They demand immediate reactions, immediate apologies, immediate emotional responses. They survive by controlling the rhythm of everyone around them. The moment you refuse to dance to their timing, they lose balance. Your calmness becomes an obstacle they cannot predict. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting their own impatience, and that reflection often angers them more than any argument ever could. People mistake silence for weakness because they've never encountered someone whose confidence doesn't require an audience. They believe strength must always announce itself. Real strength rarely does. Mountains don't explain why they're tall. Oceans don't argue about their depth. The sun doesn't ask permission before it rises. The most powerful things in existence simply continue being what they are without begging for validation. Become like that. Let your actions become conversations your mouth never needs to have. Every promise you keep, every boundary you maintain, every goal you achieve, every peaceful decision you make. Those become evidence that no explanation could ever equal. There was a time when you probably defended every misunderstanding because you feared losing people. You believed clarity would save relationships. Sometimes it does. But often it only reveals who was never listening in the first place. People committed to seeing your value don't require endless explanations. People committed to doubting you won't accept them anyway. That realization feels lonely at first, then it becomes liberating. Because freedom begins the day you realize your reputation is built more by consistent character than perfectly crafted sentences. Words can be questioned. Actions become difficult to erase. That's why the strongest individuals often appear mysterious. Not because they're hiding secrets, but because they've stopped handing everyone unrestricted access to their thoughts. They understand that transparency without wisdom becomes vulnerability. Not every person deserves to know your plans. Not everyone celebrating your dreams secretly hopes they'll come true. Some people collect information the way hunters collect tracks, not to admire you, to find your weak points. Silence protects what explanation exposes, while others broadcast every ambition before it's built. You quietly construct realities that speak for themselves. By the time anyone realizes what you've accomplished, the foundation has already become impossible to shake. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The opinions that once controlled your emotions begin losing their authority. Criticism becomes information instead of injury. Praise becomes pleasant instead of addictive. Rejection becomes direction instead of defeat. Your identity stops depending on the changing weather inside other people's minds. And when that happens, confusion begins spreading among those who always believed they could control you through approval or disapproval. They'll wonder why their words no longer move you, why their silence no longer frightens you, why their absence no longer weakens you. The answer is painfully simple. You finally discovered that peace is far too valuable to trade for permission to be yourself. And once a person reaches that realization, they become impossible to manipulate because they no longer feel compelled to explain a life that their actions have already written more truthfully than words ever could. The final stage of transformation is strangely terrifying. It isn't the moment you become stronger. It isn't the day you become fearless. It's the moment reality itself begins sounding unbelievable to the people watching your life. They hear your story, your achievements, your resilience, your discipline, and instead of accepting the evidence, they instinctively search for fiction. The truth becomes too extraordinary for ordinary thinking. That's when you realize you've crossed an invisible line. You no longer fit inside the limits other people use to measure what's possible. Most people build their expectations using averages. Average effort, average discipline, average courage, average commitment. Their minds quietly assume everyone else lives by those same standards. So when someone appears who refuses to settle for average, their entire system of understanding begins to collapse. They don't ask, "How did you become this?" They ask, "Is this even real?" Because accepting reality would require rebuilding every belief they've used to justify their own limitations. Human beings protect their worldview with incredible determination. If something threatens the story they've been telling themselves for years, they'll often reject the evidence before they reject the story. It's psychologically easier to believe you are an exception than to admit they have underestimated what relentless commitment can accomplish. That's why legends are often created around ordinary people who chose extraordinary consistency. The myths don't appear because those people possessed supernatural powers. The myths appear because the truth sounds less believable than the fantasy. Imagine someone hearing about every setback you survived, every betrayal that failed to poison your heart, every failure that became another lesson. Every lonely season you endured without abandoning your purpose, every sacrifice you made while nobody noticed. Stack all those moments together, and your life begins sounding impossible to people who surrendered after only one or two disappointments. They're not comparing your destination to theirs. They're comparing your endurance to their excuses. And excuses always lose that comparison. There comes a point where your confidence stops looking like confidence to ordinary observers. It starts looking dangerous, not because you're threatening anyone, because your existence quietly proves what disciplined human beings are capable of becoming. That proof unsettles comfortable minds. It removes the safety of saying, "Nobody could do that. Now somebody has." And once reality provides one example, every excuse built upon impossibility begins falling apart. People often imagine greatness as one spectacular achievement, a trophy, a title, a fortune, recognition. But true greatness is much stranger. It's becoming someone who remains the same person, whether the room applauds or ignores them. Someone whose standards remain unchanged, whether life is easy or unfair. Someone whose character refuses to negotiate with convenience. That kind of person becomes almost impossible to predict because they no longer react according to emotion. They respond according to principle. Most people can't understand that level of stability. Their decisions change with moods, with approval, with fear, with comfort. When they encounter someone whose actions remain aligned with purpose instead of feelings, it appears almost mechanical, almost unreal. They call you different because they have never witnessed someone whose discipline has become stronger than emotion. Eventually, your presence alone begins changing rooms before you've spoken a single word, not through intimidation, through certainty. Certainty carries a strange energy. People sense it long before they understand it. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs permission, no longer needs validation, no longer needs to prove anything. That energy cannot be imitated. It can only be earned through years of invisible victories over yourself. That's the battle nobody applauds, the battle against procrastination, against fear, against comfort, against resentment, against self-doubt, against every old version of yourself that begged you to remain ordinary. Winning those battles creates a presence that no amount of performance can fake. People notice something unusual. They just don't know what they're noticing. So they invent explanations, luck cosmetics, natural talent, he advantages, accurate opportunities, anything except the one answer that demands accountability. You became extraordinary because you refused to stop becoming. Understand this carefully. Your goal is never to appear mysterious. Your goal is to become so deeply committed to your own evolution that your results naturally exceed ordinary expectations. Mystery is simply the side effect. When preparation becomes relentless, when integrity becomes non-negotiable, when discipline becomes identity, when resilience becomes instinct, the distance between who you were and who you've become grows so vast that even people who have known you for years struggle to explain it. They'll tell stories. They'll create theories. They'll swear there must be multiple versions of you because the old one could never have accomplished what the new one has. Let them believe whatever helps them sleep at night while they argue over impossible explanations. Continue doing what brought you here in the first place. Keep choosing the difficult path when it's the right one. Keep honoring your standards when nobody is watching. Keep building a life so grounded in discipline, purpose, and relentless growth that your reality continues sounding like fiction to those who never discovered what a single human being is capable of becoming when they finally stop negotiating with their own potential.